Those of you who have been around the channel for some time will be aware that I'm quite partial to a bit of a survival game. When I say quite partial, I have to stay away from them because I get addicted to them very readily. When I saw recently that Dean Hall, the maker of DayZ and Stationeers, and has just announced Icarus, which is another survival game, was also making a Transport Tycoon management title, I went, well, what's that all about then? So I asked him. DayZ started as a mod, turned it into a game. You then you release DayZ. It is a massive success. You inject a very real sense of something new and interesting into survival gaming, which to that point had really been represented by Minecraft. And then you go and make Stationeers, and that's a little bit of a left turn. But then with Icarus that you've got in development at the moment, it feels like you're coming full circle. Is that?
Yeah.
Is that?
I mean,
fair?
there was the stuff that went on in between, and some of it made me realize that I wanted to go back and learn stuff, and particularly making a new studio. So I really enjoyed working with Mark Spaniel, the CEO of Bohemia, and part of me wishes that I could have stayed there, but it was very hard. I'm a Kiwi living in a foreign country where I don't speak the language. But setting up Rocketworks, we knew that we needed to figure out how we wanted to make games. And we had a few failed starts. We had Out of Ammo, VR game, which did pretty well.
Yeah.
And Stationeers, which started okay, dipped down a little bit, but recently has been really starting to do well since we sort of went back and just really reinvested in it.
Yeah.
So a lot of that was figuring out, you often go into things and say, I'm going to figure out how I want to run a studio and what I want to do. And along the way, you figure out a lot of things about what you don't want to do. So we were actually making an airport management game at one point for quite a long time. And actually, I started making that game before DayZ, believe it or not. Management games run in my blood, for sure. These veins are full of them. And, that's how I got my start, really, in video games. I was running a flight sim community.
Yeah.
And I was doing a lot of the web stuff for it. And I was also doing mods for Flight Simulator as part of it, and Armour. And it was all this community that linked together. And I ended up working for a local video game company in New Zealand, then called She Interactive, now called Pickpock. They make famous for making rugby league games. And that was my start in video games. So yeah, I definitely think it runs in my blood.
So talk to me of classics then. If we're talking management games, what are your kind of, these are the games that shaped me?
Oh, look, Transport Tycoon for sure. So Chris Sawyer's Transport Tycoon.
Yeah.
XCOM, the original XCOM called UFO Enemy Unknown here, that is the greatest game of all time for me, by far. It is a perfect video game. The fact that you can actually game the system the way you lay out your bases is incredible. So Julian Gollop, that game is everything to me. Then probably games like Frontier First Encounters. So I played a lot on the Amiga when I was a kid.
Are we the same person? Because yeah, I mean, you're talking about the Amiga era of stuff that I was playing as well. I mean, we were playing exactly the same stuff at exactly the same time, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, and look, so when I went to climb Mount Everest, I had a laptop and I took 2 games with me. I took OpenTDD,
right,
and XCOM, the original XCOM. Those were the 2 games I took with me. So I absolutely adore Transport Tycoon for sure. I mean, I used to play all the other games, Sim Golf. I loved City Skylines. I really liked SimCity 4 with the Rush Hour expansion.
Well, everybody did. What a game. I mean, City Skylines is effectively SimCity 4 plus Rush Hour redone plus, hold on, here's all the mods in the universe.
Yep. So City Skylines really... I actually have over the years got to talk quite a lot with many people at Paradox.
Yeah.
And I really like them. And I got to meet a couple of people from Colossal Order as well. And really just pick their brains about how they were approaching and how they got to City Skylines. And it was a long journey, as you'll know from playing their other games. There's a long journey there for sure.
But no, they've come up with something amazing. So
and Theme Hospital on the Amiga, I love that.
Yeah.
the roller coaster version, the theme one, was it Theme Park? Yeah, I think it was Theme
Theme
Park.
Park was the roller coaster version. Yeah. Okay. No. This is this is a kind of
Did my bona fides? Did I establish my bona fides?
Yeah, your resume, that matches up. That's all good. I mean, mid-90s kind of Amiga, early PC gaming management stuff. What appeals? Why management games scratching an itch particularly?
I think I just love exploring and exploring me and exploring challenges. And it's the same reason I like things in real life, like climbing mountains or skiing and stuff. It's the same as I like to play video games. I don't want a designer to make a solved problem puzzle. I want to explore it myself and explore strategies. And I feel like management games allow you to explore strategies. And yeah, like playing Kerbal Space Program or even like anything. I just love the problem solving aspect of it. It's like building a model aircraft or or anything. And I guess I'm fascinated by vehicles.
Yeah.
I just love vehicles. I love trains. I love planes. I love cars. I'm very fortunate. I have very flash cars, but I love them because of their engineering. I just like looking at their engine.
Right.
So I think that just to me, a video game that matches those together is just awesome. Any game where I can sort of explore some machinery. We tried to touch on that a bit with Stationeers. Very hard, and I think we did a pretty good job overall, and we've still got a lot of plans for it. But making these kind of games is challenging.
So, okay, before we turn, our attention to why we're all here, I want to talk about survival games because I love them. I absolutely love survival. I can lose myself in a survival game for ages, and I think it's because you're not dictated how to play at all. I mean, as much as you explore them exploring the strategies, mine is I want no one to dictate to me how I play with this. How I play with it is up to me. I can achieve the goal through whatever means I like, and it's largely up to me what that goal is. That's what I love about games, and that's why I think survival games are my favourite genre. Where do you start out? Why? Let's go for why. Why is a good question. Why DayZ in the first place?
So I was running this video game group called USEC, Unity Security Force. So it was a little military arm of a flight sim group that I'd run. And I was in the military at the time, and it was a bunch of either current military or ex-military people. And we're all in this sort of gaming group that was a mixture of armor and flight sim.
Yeah.
And I'd been making mods for that group, as well as some of them flowed over into the wider armor community. And I actually made a reinvention of armor, two prototypes. One of them was basically a first-person cooperative XCOM in the armor game, with all the base building in that, and sort of a zombie one. And the zombie one had come from basically I was using armor at commercial variant virtual battle space. I'd seen the army using it, and I thought I could come up with a way to emotionally train soldiers about situations they'd face. So I'll give you an example. You get a bunch of soldiers together and you put them on a computer and get them to do a training exercise, and someone dies. They don't care, right? When someone dies in Counter-Strike or whatever, you just carry on. So what outcome are you really getting from that? And so I was looking for ways to make the players care. So instead of killing the soldier outright, I'd have them get incapacitated. And I found that if I made the soldiers' characters persistent across play sessions, they started to take it seriously. It would be like if I say, this is I've got a steering wheel here, computer. If I say, this is your steering wheel now, you treat it very differently than if I say, hey, you can borrow the steering wheel for 10 minutes. And so I think that concept of ownership and introducing that into a survival game was what I found really interesting. I found my experience in Minecraft was very temporary. And I mean, look, DayZ was successful, but I think I suppose I wasn't satisfied with the outcome of it. And maybe I never will be truly satisfied with the outcome of my games, and maybe that's a very human thing, and maybe that's why vehicles evolve so much, because there's always designers there going, we can do better. So I think for me, I want to see us do a better job at dealing with what you're talking about. I very much believe, for me, playing a video game, we establish, as game developers, we establish the theater, the stage, and the setting. And we should do a very good job of that. And the rules. And then let the players find solutions, if they exist, to the problems they encounter.
Interesting.
And that's been something we've fought very hard for with Icarus, to try and deliver that.
So,
and we'll see. And ultimately, that's the thing that, what I love about our industry, the thing that decides whether something's a success or a failure is the customers.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it ceases to be your game the second they have their hands on it.
But I kind of love that. And we lost that with the standalone, and we've sort of gotten back at being good at this with Stationeers a bit, and I really hope we do that with Icarus, just actually talking with the players, talking with the streamers, the YouTubers, and actually I just love that back and forward. And it was awesome at the start of the mod. It was good. People held me to account, and I got asked tough questions, but it was a good back and forth. I think with the madness of the standalone and some of the decisions I'd made, we kind of got lost with it. And I think to make good games, I need that interaction with the community, not just positive feedback, but actually challenging, interesting questions, and just being able to pull forward ideas. So that's what I'm sort of hoping to get into.
You don't learn anything from positive feedback other than, great, okay, good. But why is it that I personally don't think this is ticking a box? I think there's something missing. What are you guys taking from this? I think
exactly. And I think as well that what you tend to find is someone who really likes your product and really understands it will be able to give you good feedback. And I think you have to look at it one of two ways. This person is very passionate about what I'm doing.
Right.
And so I think you take that feedback in, but I also think that, you're the adult, you're the one who knows the code base and that, so you also need to be able to take that feedback in, chew it through, honestly consider it, and then give an honest answer. Even if the answer is, look, we made a decision a year ago to write a system like this, we can't rewrite that system, so, we can't do that. But maybe you might be able to go, look, maybe we could do another thing. We could do this, and it might sort of address your problem.
Yeah.
Well, I love that. I love that process. It's super rewarding. Well, it's the best bit about making games.
I spend a lot of time listening to players. In fact, that's all I do. Is I listen to players a lot, and they're never backward in coming forward and telling you what they want. But the challenging part is interpreting that and turning it into actually, what do they need? What's the itch they're trying to scratch there?
Yeah, and if you're not good enough to answer that question, then you need to get good enough too. So, as a game developer, it's like when I pitch something, I generally don't I don't really care about NDAs and stuff. If I'm pitching a game to someone and when I leave the room, they can imagine someone else making that game, then I've failed at my job. My job is to convince someone, hey, I know this game and I am going to make this game and I'm going to learn and adapt doing it. And I think players deserve that in their game developers. So for me, it's always about trying to be better. It's about taking that feedback and then trying to be the adult in the room and saying, look, I heard your feedback, because you've got the boots on the ground.
Yeah.
And so I think it's striking that balance. You definitely need to be able to take that feedback in and then absorb what you can from it.
So, who's doing well in terms of survival games? Who's pushing the genre in an interesting direction? It might not be what you'd necessarily make, but
look, I love Valheim, and Valheim just makes me want to applaud. And I think the way I described it on Twitter is very much how I feel. It was a great idea, flawlessly executed.
Right.
So it was a group of people who believed something strongly, I suspect. They sat down and they did what they said they were going to do. That sounds simple and obvious.
Yeah.
But as anyone who works in video games knows, it's never that simple and obvious, not usually.
Sure.
And it just reminds me of Banished. I don't know if you remember that game.
Of course.
The little town strategy game.
Yep.
and I think I just applaud that. As everything how I do it? No, but that's the way everything is, and I really enjoyed it, and I really liked that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, good. The group of people that I play with on a regular basis. So the Fail Brigade, who are my merry channel backers, we play a lot of from time to time. It fits and spurts, but we play Eco.
Did you know I've been playing a lot of Eco?
No, I didn't know.
I've been playing a lot of Eco.
It's good,
I
isn't
actually
it?
just stopped playing. It becomes a lot like work.
Yep.
So I actually just stopped playing recently. I've been heavily into the Australia, New Zealand scene of Eco, very, very much so. I got very into the government side of it, really liked it. I think Eco is one of the most interesting survival games out there.
Completely agree.
And what an interesting premise when you come to that ownership idea. You only own that experience for like the 30 days or whatever. I very fascinating idea. I hope I get to meet those developers sometime. Very, very fascinating game. And I actually resisted. I only really picked it up maybe 4 months ago. It had been on my radar. It was so much different and also so much better than I was expecting.
Yes.
If we talk about it too much, I'll have to go play it. I've managed to
sorry.
wean myself off it.
The interesting one is actually the interesting part of it is one I actually wanted to touch on was that personally I find that Eco's economy has got the classic problem that all survival games have, which is that the learning curve is the wrong way around. Or rather, the difficulty curve is the wrong way around. In any survival game, it's at its toughest at the start. And then as time goes on, you are developing ways and means. I mean, just think about food, for example. To start with, you're scavenging here, there, and everywhere. But pretty quickly, you've got farms built and you've got food being produced. And therefore, it starts getting easier and easier. And that compelling sense of needing to play actually gets degraded. Now, with Icarus, you've got to hit your rendezvous point, or it's all for nothing. Is that a conscious effort to try and resolve that difficulty curve kind of inversion?
Well, absolutely. I think there's a perverse obsession in survival game development on the content at the end of the experience, and I guess it's sort of had to be that way. If you're an ARC player or an Eco player, you want more content. Your customers want more content. So where do you put that content? You put it at the end.
Right.
But that delivers the exact problem you're talking about. I tend to find as human beings, we solve problems that we're forced to. So with our development with Icarus, we said to the team, our customers are going to play the base survival mechanics. That is the most important part of a survival game. Chopping down trees, gathering, or building structures.
Right.
And that's what that's the pillar of our game. If it's not good, then it all falls over. So yes, very much a conscious effort. Without relying on too many tricks and gimmicks either. So I like to think that we're trying to deliver that serene. I used to play this mod called Frostfall, I think it was, for Skyrim. And that was the vibe we were going for. Now, I feel like Valheim went in a different direction a bit. I would have gone a bit more hardcore, but I really like they got that vibe right. They got that feeling of walking around a forest.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to deliver that and deliver our content around that stuff. And by breaking it into sessions, we're also able to introduce content without breaking the whole experience, which is what I tend to find happen in survival games as you start to have to throw content in.
So with Valheim's in an interesting position because they've got portals in there at the moment, which cuts out the whole you have to walk. As time goes on, you've got further to go away from the safety of your base camp to go and do something fun. And there was an article, or they made a comment a couple of weeks ago about they want to restrict the use of portals.
And you can tell they did, by the restrictions they put in place on ore. And that's what I mean. Like I really hats off to the Valheim developers. I think they were aware of those kinds of things. And it was a challenge for them to deal with that because people want to be able to move around legitimately, but also one of the most awesome parts of the game is moving around. And this is the dance that, survival game developers or maybe game developers in general face, is dancing between sort of drudgery and making the experience feel meaningless. There's this sort of sweet spot of tension that you need to put the player in to deliver the experience.
And when you're dropping them into an open world environment where they can dictate their own pace, that's a real challenge to be able to get that right.
For sure.
Okay, right. Enough of this survival business. Let's talk about the real stuff. You are working on Art of the Rail. Is that a work in progress title, or is it? Are you married to that one now?
I think I'm married to it. I call it AOTR.
Okay.
So a couple of games. I'm trying to remember one. There's one from the depths. I don't know. Like a lot of these good games, they end up getting shortened down, like OpenTDD. So I needed a name, and I needed something that fitted, and I didn't want to go with something corny. So someone suggested Art of the Rail, I think on a stream or something, and I was like, you know what? Yeah, AOTR.
AOTR is good. All right. So obviously it's Transport Tycoon. What are you trying to do? What's the aim here? What are you trying to build?
So, look, OpenTDD has stood the test of time, and I don't want to redo OpenTDD because I think OpenTDD is the best of what it is. You can play it on Steam now, which is awesome. But I did want to take that concept and I wanted to explore where it could go. So there was one big area that I feel OpenTDD didn't really get me, and that was in the idea of sort of creating a system and optimizing it. So it's something I love doing with Factorio, games like that, figuring out what is, optimal way and then improving it and making it better. I do that a lot in City Skylines.
Yeah.
And so that for me really started to rally around the idea of what are you doing? And you're moving stuff around. And I felt like stations weren't as central to the experience as I felt they should be. So that's something I've focused on a lot. So I guess, what I'm trying to do is take this idea of your classic tycoon game, of what it was in the late 90s, say, and actually do that. Not this sort of, and this maybe sounds a little mean, but this mobile sort of tycoon game genre. And honestly, that's why I chose a name that was completely not tycoon.
Right.
Because I feel like it's been co-opted by a very casual audience, which is fine, but that's not what I want. I want a management game that scales so I can have lots of trains that I can optimize. And it's pretty to look at as well, but not like out of control. It doesn't have to be amazing, but it just needs to look consistent and good.
Okay, so what have you? What else have you been looking at in terms of taking inspiration for? Oh, they've done something interesting. Maybe that works in, or are you trying to filter out the noise of other games in order to keep the purity of vision that you were talking about with Valheim?
Look, I've definitely liked some of the feeling I got from games like Transport Fever, but it was a little bit hard to translate much of it directly because I really wanted to make sure I'd also delivered on multiplayer.
Yeah.
So I really looked at Transport Tycoon and said, what's really interesting about that? Building these great train networks and then being able to optimize them. And so that, and then I'd sort of look and say, well, what's missing? Well, information. There's not a lot of information available to you. I think about, is it Railroad Tycoon, another great railroad game, and Railroad Tycoon 2 had some awesome company mechanics.
Yep.
I mean, I own my own company, and I'm fascinated by, the way corporate structures work and stuff like that. So I'm like, why isn't that in the game? Why isn't there loan systems and stuff like that? Mm-hmm. So I suppose I looked around at a lot of those games and thought, well, what a interesting stuff out of that. I also felt like the industries could do with a little bit of a rework with Art of the Rail 2 from OpenTDD. Make them a bit cleaner because I felt like a lot of people really struggled with how they'd work. Wasn't a lot of transparency in the mechanics. And transparency doesn't have to mean casualness. It can just mean giving you the ability to find the information.
Right.
Profit loss, as simple as that. So I've already done that. So you can find out deep data for individual trains and stuff like that, individual vehicles, and also to try and remove some drudgery. So yeah, maybe my general approach has really been, I've played so much Transport Tycoon. It was like, realistically, what is the pieces of this that I'd want to see different? I think from me, the pillars of Art of the Rail, the first one is it's really fun to make something and then optimize it and make it better. And you figure that out. Not the game like push you and say, oh, you need to build it like this.
Yeah.
I think that's a massive mistake that many of these kinds of games make. They say, oh, this is how you build this. I didn't want that. I want to be able to present the player information about what's happening. And then after they've built something, then the player go, you know what, I'm going to try this. How does this affect the route? So that I think is a key pillar. The second was I wanted you to be able to see what was going on in the world. So you see logs fill up on the trailer. You see the logs at the stations. Instead of the stations being magical cargo holds, why don't I get the player to build the cargo yards so that each of those stations has like character? And I think that was sort of an accidental win. When I found that you started seeing the trailers fill up and stuff like that, I don't know, I felt much more connected to the experience.
It seems to me that between Transport Tycoon and then Railroad Tycoon, there you go, or Sid Meier's Railroads or something like that, there was a much greater emotional connection to what you were doing in Railroads. Because it was your company, because there were AI competitors who are trying to buy you out. And in recent years, you've had Railroad Corporation and Railway Empire have both tried to take on that railroads approach, whereas Transport Fever has kind of gone after Transport Tycoon in its own way. But one has the Tycoon route, for me, it has a little bit less emotional connection to it, other than the satisfaction in I made that looks great. So how do you kind of cross that bridge? How do you make someone care more about what they've built beyond the level of efficiency that it has?
A great question, and I think this is where that gets to the heart of what I really wanted to see in OpenTDD, and what I felt was a great opportunity. I think the way you make someone care is you have their actions change the world. And I think if you've played Eco, that makes sense.
Right.
So, and that's the economic system that I've been working around is actually inspired by City Skylines. So City Skylines, to make a building grow, I mean, you know this, but I suppose for people who are here from my sake of argument, you have to grow a building through these, what are they called? Something ceilings, a little, basically, so you have to tick off a bunch of boxes.
Right.
For
the requirements
building,
in order to build it up.
Requirement caps, right?
Yeah.
So it needs to be close enough to to move to a level 2 building, it needs to be close enough to a hospital and a police station or whatever. And that's how I thought, okay, well that's how I can have industries grow. So, and some of them might require little stuff. So sure, say you've got this coal mine. Well, if you provide the coal mine with a couple of workers a month, that could be a demand cap. That's it, demand cap. I was looking for that word.
Okay, no, I'm with you. Yeah.
Or goods, just one trailer load of just goods. Then that's another demand cap. And have these little ways that the player can interface and change the world and grow their area so that you're investing in that industry, you're investing in that town.
Yeah.
And that's really what I have spent a lot of time exploring. How can I have it? Okay, so, to help this town grow, do you provide it some lumber? Do you provide it some reinforced concrete? So, yes, it's about trains and vehicles and moving stuff around, but it's also about you making some strategic decisions about how you sort of passively grow this economy you're in so that you can maybe capitalize on it later without your friends also rushing in and capitalizing on it too. And look, the proof, as they say, is not in the pudding but the eating. So I guess, we'll see how well that goes. But I'm very fascinated by that. I think that that's a really good way to make people care about the experience.
So, I mean, I play a lot of Transport Fever, and it's the look and the feel of it. And
I've noticed.
Yeah, all right. But the one thing it's missing is, and I think you touched on it there, is that if I'm operating a lumber yard out in the middle of nowhere, I'm going and I'm dropping off logs and turning them into planks and moving them around, but there's no workers. It always felt to me, and I always kind of get a mental picture of kind of the Midwest US, where back in the early 20th century, you would have towns start to emerge around an industry, and I guess the biggest example of that would be Detroit. Where, the home of the motor industry became this vast metropolis purely because of the workforce and the industry in that area. And what Transport Fever doesn't do is you can't create new towns. New towns won't appear out of nowhere. I had an experiment that I did in the first game where I set up a route that just had a stop in a passenger stop in the middle of nowhere, going, I'm going to invite people just to get off and go and make their way in the world, make a new town, a new settlement, and they just refused to do so because I think that mechanic only lived in my head. But I think that this is more of a pro tip or a player's, hey, why don't you try? Where any time you've got an industry going, they do need people to work there. And those people need somewhere to live, and maybe they don't want to commute. So you get some shacks.
And that actually, and look, that actually builds on that idea of station. So I see the station as actually almost more central to the experience, hopefully, of Art of the Rail than the rails themselves. And that the reason is that and I sort of stumbled across this by accident when it was sort of technically easier for me to have the player placing the cargo yards for different kinds. So you need to decide what you're going to place around. And I was like, okay, why stop at cargo? Why not you be able to place covered cargo yards that let the whatever cargo you're storing there last longer without degrading. Nice. Maybe extra passenger buildings to get more revenue out of them. And then I was like, okay, well, there's this drudgery that comes from vehicle spam and OpenTDD. Why don't I have an option for you to solve that? Why don't you have a courier building that you can build and just assign vehicles to, and it's an on-demand delivery. So when you've dropped off goods at that station, within a radius around your courier depot, any vehicle you assign to it will go on and deliver the stuff out.
Right.
And and then that sort of freed me up to say, okay, well, there's this kind of small backflow that can happen where to grow an industry, you need to supply it with workers. Now, I didn't want to too heavily penalize a player. I think that was something that City Skylines taught me. It's kind of hard to super lose City Skylines, but I'm sort of okay with that.
Yeah.
But the idea is the game can reward you. So yeah, you might be getting some money from this coal mine. It's doing okay. But if you want it to grow, if you want it to get better, and if you want to nurture it, then you're going to need to send it at least a couple of, not many workers. And maybe you'll lose money. Maybe you'll lose money running that bus to that place each month or whatever. But it doesn't matter because overall you'll grow that business. And I wanted players to be able to experiment and look at those kinds of things and have the world change.
This all sounds like it's right up my street. I'm itching to have a go, but you're relatively early on at the moment. How far through would you say you were?
Well, look, I think that if there's one thing I've really figured out is the importance of scale in video games. So I think if you look at everything I do now, I really question scale. How can it scale? And I think if you're interested in multiplayer games, it basically has to be one of the first questions that pops into your mind. That's the hard part. So I went through, I looked at, we've got an unreleased little project as well as Stationeers and stuff like that about how I was doing it and how I would approach this if I was aiming for OpenTD scale. And I dealt with that pretty well. And that's, I suppose, the hardest part of it is that.
Right.
I've now, just recently, I got the locations of cities. So it finds good locations for cities, basically area away from stuff pretty well. So I've got a lot of my generation going good. And particularly, I guess the biggest thing is my support for modding will be far superior even to City Skylines. So the game actually ships with an editor that you can edit all the game data and load in models, create everything. Because basically when I'm adding game data to the game, I am adding it as a mod. And that was something I sort of learned from Rimworld and Kerbal Space Program. If you really want to support modding, I think if you as a developer want to add content, add it as a mod. So that's sort of been the approach. So I'd say actually I've knocked off, and I think it's a good development approach, knocked off the real hard stuff first. We've actually got 2 artists working on it. One of the artists, Peter, he's the artist on Stationeers, and he's actually ex-Bohemia Interactive. He was one of their 5th employees.
You stole him.
I love working with him. Well, he's worked it out. He moved over to New Zealand a long time ago, and he's just a fantastic artist to work with. He loves vehicles as well. He made the A10 for Armour.
Oh, cool.
And he has been doing a beautiful job of going through and replacing my terrible programmer art. And I just absolutely love working with him. But we have also, to speed things along, we've brought in a contract artist to help as well, who also loves trains.
Right.
So that's a key requirement.
Always helps if you like trains.
So I suppose to answer your question, I'm actually pretty far along in terms of the difficult stuff. Now it's sort of putting the meat on the bones a bit. Stuff I'm less concerned about, but that I just need to methodically go through and make sure I get right.
Now, you see, look, you've set me up there for a question that I was going to ask towards the end. But I want to talk about multiplayer first. What's your ambition for multiplayer? Is it going to be purely competitive? Is it collaborative? Are there the mechanics in there that kind of lead you down one path or another?
No, it's super either or, basically. So as it is at the moment, you can actually go in and play the game in multiplayer, and you can join the same company as someone else. The game doesn't care. So I really wanted to provide as many options as possible, have people be able to even turn on and off components of the game that they didn't like, and approach the multiplayer in a way they want. I think there's just so many different ways that people want to. And again, if I want to do something with the game, then I'm like, okay, well, I should add that as a feature. So I want to do a cool video for the Steam store, right? Because I need it to be able to push the button. I need a trailer. So I'm like, okay, well, I need to add a cinematic camera. I'm like, well, if I'm adding a cinematic camera, why don't I let people be able to use a cinematic camera? I think that's the attitude and approach I've taken. So yeah, I suppose long-winded way of saying I sort of want to support however people want to. I think even if you're playing it competitively, at least with my friends, it's not super cutthroat. It's more just you're sort of competing in the same world.
Right.
Sort of.
Yeah, no, you see, you've given the right answer again. Anyone would think you'd seen my line of questioning in advance.
Well, I think if you really like these games, and bearing in mind, I don't need to make this game. I don't know whether it'll even make any money, but I don't care, honestly. Like, I don't get to work, and it's not a good idea I do directly on our games. So with Icarus, I don't cut code at all. If I want something to happen in the game, I have to go talk to someone. And that's very frustrating for someone who likes making stuff.
Yeah.
So for me, Art of the Rail is this project, this passion of mine, something I really believe in, and I think could be a really good game.
Okay.
And I'm also learning a lot myself and scratching that creator itch. I'm sure it's the same for you with your channel, right? You just making a video, exploring something and explaining something. There's just, I don't know how to describe it, but it's the same for me with Art of the Rail. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Right, I got 2 questions for you, and the first one is a slightly easy one. Early access. You are. I think you might be the poster boy for early access, and I don't think that was intentional. I think you just ended up there by being among the first to have could it be considered contentious early access release with DayZ.
Notorious.
Slightly notorious. What are the advantages and the pitfalls, I guess, of an early access approach?
So I have two opinions on early access. On one hand, I think early access is fantastic. I was just quoted today in Kotaku for saying that publishers will have learned nothing from Valheim. And I stand by that.
Yeah.
They won't have. Because publishers, and they have to be, it costs you $100 million to make a game.
Yep.
You're going to be a bit careful. And so, they don't take a lot of risks. Early access allows us to take risks. But who's shouldering that risk? The customers. Are they equipped to assess the risk?
Right.
And so that I think, on the one hand, I think early access allows us to experiment as game developers. It brings us things like Kerbal Space Program, like Valheim, experiments that a publisher might not otherwise have gone and looked at.
Is there not an argument to be made, though, that that level of experimentation is all well and good if you are a studio that has financial security? Because one of the arguments for early access is if you're an indie developer, it allows you to secure the funding to actually complete making the game. So is an early access launch your final launch? Because there's no guarantee that as you go through the early access period that you end up making something that attracts a heck of a lot more players into. Is it not?
Yeah, and that's what I mean. So I have two minds about it. On one hand, I'm like, hey, look, it potentially has this awesome opportunity for us to get ideas into the community that otherwise might not have seen the light of day. But that puts the risk onto the customers. And if we as an industry struggle to manage risk, how on earth are we expecting the customers to? And I think you see this in people's frustration. And this puts you in a tight spot as a developer as well. So we will have people with, let's take Stationeers. It's always good to talk about something you're okay with criticizing if it's your own. So with Stationeers, we had a bunch of ideas at the start, and you go along the way and you figure out some of those ideas are good and some of them are bad. And of the bad ideas, some of them you can change and some of them you can't. Right. It's like when you're building a house or you're making a vehicle or something. Anything, you build anything. You make a video for YouTube. You do it and you're like, okay, some of these bits I don't like, and maybe you can't change them because you've already made the video.
Yeah.
You can't go back and redo it. And it's the same with video games. And I think sometimes that can really upset people. So you'd see us say, look, we tried this thing, didn't work, so we're dropping that. And then you get a bunch of people upset who might say, oh, well, you said you were going to do this thing. You should do that. But I think going after a bad idea is a bad idea.
Right.
It's more bad ideas on top of it. So I think there are definite challenges to it. I'm not a fan of early access. I am a fan of living games. So I am a fan of making a game and then updating it forever, at least as long as I can operate.
Well, and as long as you've got fresh ideas, right? Or fresh approaches to tackling the same problem.
Yeah, I mean, I love going back and looking at stuff. So over the Christmas period, I was pretty busy with work to make up time for COVID, and it was a quiet time. I actually got to make my own entire update myself for Stationeers, and I loved it. It was great to just get back in and cut code and play a game. I just went through the forums. I looked at what people were saying. I experienced it myself by playing it, and that to me was the funnest part of, say, the mod. So yeah, like there's a core spirit of early access that I think was personified for me in the mod for DayZ.
Right.
And that was how I liked making games. That interaction. And I feel like slapping early access on it and putting it into Steam lost some of that, and it became sort of something else, if that makes sense.
No, I'm with you. No, I get it.
There's kind of this growing a game with a community, and then there's a selling something as early access, and they're not the same.
Okay, that's good. That's good stuff. I was just curious because you do. I mean, and I guess these days because you do have a level of financial security going on, it is the experimentation that makes you kind of go, oh, it's ready for you to play, but we're not done with it. We've got more that we want to do with this, but we want to find out what you think right now.
Yeah, the part of the problem is as you get bigger, the stakes get higher. And I think this is one thing people don't realize with video games. I mean, their name skips a beat from me, but the company who were doing like the Walking Dead games, the sort of story ones. Oh, God, what's their name? Anyway,
not Traveller's Tales, but it is another. It's a T one. Yeah, I know the guys you mean.
Yeah, so but these companies that are huge have massive successes, but they quickly go on to having massive costs.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the big challenge that you face. And if Rockstar were to go out and make a huge gamble with their next GTA, if it failed, that would probably be the end of the company. So, the big experiments are the stakes just get higher.
Right.
And, and you can really struggle as a company to make new IP. So, CCP took a bunch of experiments like with, dust and stuff like that. And it's really hard. And I think, full credit to developers who take experiments and fail with them. Like it hurts, but it's necessary.
And it's a bit of a luxury.
It is. I think when you're going through it, and having been through many project failures myself, it doesn't feel like a luxury at the time. It hurts. You take it right to you. You lose years worth of work. But I still stand by experimenting. And, I can't put my hand on my heart and say that every part of the rail is going to be amazing and all my ideas are going to work. But I'm really proud that I'm trying them. Because, it's very easy to not. It's very easy to come up with reasons to not try it. But I firmly believe that the true management side of things has been infected a little bit by sort of a casual tycoon genre. And I don't know, I think about people like, Chris Sawyer or David Barabin and that they're like my heroes. And I actually got to meet David Barabin once. And Julian Gollop. And maybe I can try and make my own mark on it, and I'd love to try and do that with the management genre.
So
I try not to say tycoon anymore.
No. Like you're allowed. I think tycoon has got to the point where you can call that a genre without tarring yourself with the click, wait 5 seconds, click, wait 5 seconds, click. Right? I think people have got that level of understanding. Incidentally, if you ever decide to go back and make your airport tycoon game, there are people that play that. Airline operation. That's an interesting one as well.
There was an Amiga game that let you run an airline. I don't know if you remember it. Yeah, it was cool. I really liked that.
Detroit as well. Did you ever play Detroit? The one where you run a car manufacturer. Oh, no. that was awful but good. Because a whole lot of it just existed in your mind. When you're doing, because you would do marketing campaigns, but you'd design the car and you put the engine in and you'd organise the suspension and stuff. And there've been a couple of recent ones that have had the go, but it's obvious they've got no funding at all. So it's clearly, one or two people working on it. And the UX is maybe... What's the... Gear City, I think, is the best one. That might be another Aussie dev.
They're New Zealand devs.
They're New Zealand. Yeah, they need some... Go and chuck them some help.
Am I getting another?
Because they just need someone who understands UX a little bit. Just ever so slightly.
And it's expensive making games. It's really expensive.
Yeah, Gear City's got an awful lot of potential, but navigating your way around it is horrendous. Anyway, I've got one last question for you, and you haven't got an answer because it's a stupid question. I am regularly kind of going wondering about game developers, particularly kind of lead designers, and I've only really nailed it down with two designers. This will make sense in a moment, I assure you. I've only really nailed it down with two people, and that's Will Wright and Peter Molyneux.
Mhm.
Now, Will Wright is driven by, or used to be before he went off to go and tinker with robots or whatever he's doing these days. He's been driven throughout everything that he's ever made by how do you play with life. How can I, as a player, engage with life and make something lifelike out of what I'm doing? And it doesn't matter if you talk about The Sims, or if you're talking about Sim City, or if you're talking Sim Earth, Sim Ant, any of those things. It's all about mucking about with life. Peter Molyneux, on the other hand, is how do you play God? That was always his kind of founding principle. With Fable, he went in a slightly different direction because it was about how do you care about what you're playing with. But it was always, at its core, was your God, what do you do with those powers? And that goes back to Populous and Powermonger, to Black and White, and even some of these weird but not quite right 22 cans things that he's made. Is there a defining kind of strand that you are trying to tap into? Is there kind of like a one-liner that really sums up your drive as a designer?
I think so. I actually feel like I'm quite a one-dimensional person in some ways. I think for me, it's I'm an explorer. For me, it's about going a little bit further, and that can make it seem odd that I'd be interested in management games and survival games, but I see them as so close.
Right.
And they match up with what I do in real life. I love exploring, and exploring is about being presented with unsolved problems and you finding the answers to them. So the art of the rail, you've got this blank area, you've got little city here, you've got industries here. How do you make that grow? How do you make that work? How do you make that survive and maybe thrive? And how do you go that little bit further to do that without losing it all?
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing that attracts me to survival games or playing Euro Truck Simulator, you know?
Yep.
How do I go that little bit further to upgrade my truck? I need that context.
Yep.
So for me, I need that context. That's the nitrous in my engine that lights me forward and gets me into an idea. And so I think, yeah, for me, it's the explorer. I'm an explorer and I want to explore. And I don't want to be told how to do that.
Right. That's exploration. Okay. No, good. All right. I need to play more Stationeers because I've only got about 6 or 8 hours, I think, something like that. And I got to the extent of I'd got a couple of solar panels up, and I went, how do I get these to track the sun? And after poking around, there was a script that you could stick into your solar panels to actually track the movement of the sun. And I went, flipping heck, that's clever. I would have never figured that out on myself. Instead, I would have built 4 times as many solar panels just to capture the sun at all angles.
Yeah, so I know Notch quite well, and he just got into playing it. Look, I'm really proud of Stationeers. It's a super niche game, but I'm just proud it exists. And look, a lot of people are like, why didn't you just slap a toolbar on and call it a day?
Yeah.
I don't want to make things that are the same as everything else. Take interesting ideas from things and try them out and see if you can push something a little bit further. And I'm really proud of what we've done. And the team have also managed to add a whole bunch more better tutorials and stuff with it. Look, we got a lot of big plans with Stationeers. I think it's concurrent. We had our best weekend ever, which is really odd because normally that's on your launch. But yeah, I think that's just a matter of just sitting down, producing really regular updates,
Yep.
talking with the community, addressing some of their feedback while pushing back and being honest about the things that you can't change. And so I think that's working out well. But I'm very proud of that, and I think we learned a lot. Some of the lessons from that have actually even flowed into Icarus, and definitely a lot of the lessons, particularly around scale and performance, have flowed into Art of the Rail for me.
I mean, that was my point. Is like I need to play more of it, but it feels like okay, this is going to generate a lot of lost hours for you, because you'll get sucked down that rabbit hole, and you'll go, I know what I'm building next. But no, what I really like about it actually is just how brutal it is. It just kind of goes like, prepare to
It's
die.
getting-
If you can prevent
Getting a little
it, you're
bit more
doing well.
brutal. So the update coming out tomorrow, because you'll be releasing the video maybe just before it comes out, but it has food spoilage in it. Actually, people know about it now. I think about it because it's already on the beta anyway.
Oh, there's another
Yeah,
problem. Thanks.
But yeah, that's what I mean. Like, let's give these problems to the players. We need to give them tools, and we've got a lot more planned on that front, and also to put some better structure around the game. Also, some optimization, some boring stuff like that. But nevertheless, extremely important. I enjoy playing it. I played a heck of a lot over Christmas. It's come a long way. The rocket stuff really helps. I think we've got a bit more to go before I'd round it out. And you can get around the hardcoreness by just respawning. Want to deal with that one. So a future update's going to have a more clarified difficulty system and get rid of some of the edges, how you can get around, by, say, just respawning to get around some of the teeth of the survival mechanics.
Awesome. Dean, it's been an absolute delight talking to you. Thank you very much for coming along for a chat.
Yeah, I look forward to getting you a key to try out
I
Out of
look
the
forward
Rail.
to that too. Yeah, no, that'd be great.
And I think it's that live kind of feedback of the game that I'm looking for. I think a game like Out of the Rail is going to be a small community. It's very useful for me when YouTubers cover our games because that means I can kind of watch it in the time I have and actually go through and skip back and observe how someone's playing or how they're having problems or opportunities they've identified as well. So I look forward to it. Look forward to getting the feedback.
Awesome. I await your pleasure. Thank you very much. That's great.